Right now, today, the US midterm elections are going on. Everybody is on edge, wondering who's gonna win, deciding the fate of the United States. Well, of course, that will be the topic of today. But what's really happening behind the scenes? What's more important? The first thing is the midterms and the economy, and that's where I'm gonna take this video. The second thing is the inflation being front and center, how this has really been integral to what's happening in the midterms. The third is Europe is the weakest link, and I'll tie that all together. You wanna stick with me, I'll explain everything you need to know. Let's go. Midterms to change the economy. In almost all likelihood, a new phase of US economic policymaking is coming in the wake of Tuesday's midterm congressional elections. At the time of this recording, it's just before the elections. By the time you're watching it, this has already happened. They're tabulating the votes, and we'll see who is the victor. People may choose a side, but ultimately, everything I'll show you today will not be resolved because of the structure itself. Let me explain. First thing, the most important issue for midterm voters. Number one is the economy, 26%. Number two is inflation. And of course, these two go hand in hand. And I wanted to talk about how they have all these different packages and stimulus and quantitative easing and mortgage-backed security purchases and just about everything else. But we have seen, despite all of their actions, despite all of their activities, nothing was really done to resolve the problems. You saw that. It was very clear. From 2020 up until the present, we saw trillions of dollars being put out. And what occurred? Well, I can tell you that the corporate bond buying program that was done by the Federal Reserve certainly helped out companies like Apple, now the biggest behemoth in the world. It helped them. But who else did it help? Well, of course, all of those connected to the ins and outs. And we see that these establishments, these mega conglomerates, are always going to do better at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the election cycle. They're always going to benefit. Let me show you some more here. If we look through this list, you will see things like the debt limit and Social Security and Medicare and the tax policy and, of course, social spending. I could show you all of these different things. And you've got to understand that while you might be able to kind of lean towards one direction, nobody is going to have these things resolved. Social Security and Medicare, they have gone way beyond. These unfunded liabilities are over $100 trillion, depending on what you include, and I've seen all different calculations, but it's simply mathematically impossible to ever pay for these things. We have gone far beyond. That's why printing a few extra trillion doesn't seem like it's too much these days. Hey, why not? Let's give a few trillion here, a few trillion there. And then, of course, there's the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is part of this inside clique of all these groups that have come out over the years showing their true colors. And we know who the Federal Reserve is there to represent, not you and I. And nothing's going to change in that regard. They won't even audit the Federal Reserve. This government will not audit the Federal Reserve. You have a few people, literally a handful of people, that are willing to sign on to that. And that's it. That's how you see it taking place today, right in front of our very eyes. Sky-high electricity is Biden's new pain point before the elections. U.S. consumers are increasingly struggling to pay utility bills. Wait a minute, did I say struggling to pay for the latest Rolls Royce? No, not at all. In fact, they can't pay for their utility bills. Now that tells you that we are entering a very different world, doesn't it? Well, that's this article, what it breaks down, and this is really what I've been covering all along. And it hurts to think about, because what we're talking about here, like I said, it's not the latest Rolls Royce. It's not the new iPhone. We're talking about food, shelter, water, energy, the basic things. And people can't afford to pay. Now, I understand some people, they have been very bad with their money. That's a fact. But how many people just can't make it by because things are too expensive, not enough jobs, whatever the case may be? There are people in this situation, or unfortunate circumstances, a health issue. It just completely wipes them out. This happens all the time. And yet today, the money is going to buy nonsense, to spend on nonsense. Think about the trillions that they pumped into the system a few years ago. Most of that money did not go to the people who need it. Here they talk about how obviously everyone is discussing the high cost of gasoline, but they say another energy cost is coming into focus: skyrocketing electricity bills. Now you look at one place or the other, and of course you're going to get variances, but in general, the prices of energy, in this case here, electricity bills, have risen substantially. And while they're going to try to make deals left, right, and center, what do we want to do? Do we want to put some wind power over here? Or in the case of the New York Republican candidate, he's urging the state to reverse its ban on natural gas drilling to lower utility bills. I'm not sure what they're going to be able to actually get through. Okay, that's the thing. You can get somebody in charge, but what are they actually able to move through? Electricity costs are already a key topic around kitchen tables, with 1 in 6 households falling behind on payments as budgets are stretched thin by rising prices from everything from food to housing. I mean, that alone is a shocking statement. And yet, people are just going through the motions. What can they do? They feel helpless. And that tells you that we are in a very different world. This is just showing us a chart, if you can see that, from what would be considered historical norms. Electricity year-over-year percentage change. Yes, it's up a little, it's down a little, but now we're seeing that what looks like around 15%. Truly extreme, okay? And then, of course, they talk about Europe, countries including the UK and Germany offering utility bill subsidies, and officials have been forced to explain to outraged customers how they plan to shield people from the costs that have become unaffordable. That's what people are dealing with right now in Europe and what they're getting from their governments. And are they going to do some of the same things in the United States? I guess it depends on where we go from here, but it's not a real final solution, of course. More workers get side hustles to keep up with rising costs. So, of course, we see this all the time, but people are doing this out of necessity. This is an absolute fact. They have to get a second job. They have to get a third job because they cannot afford basic essentials. And this is very important to see how it will become a real pain point for a lot of people out there. The US Northeast is hurtling towards a winter heating crisis, because if you can't afford that now, what happens to you come January? You're going to be in big trouble, right? Region is rationing heating oil, warning of a natural gas shortage as well. I mean, I know these things have happened in the past, but it's not exactly normal. Just a couple points. Heating oil delivered to New York is the priciest ever. Retailers in Connecticut are rationing it to prevent panic buying. New England stockpiles of diesel and heating oil, the same product taxed differently, are a third of normal levels. Natural gas inventories are also below average. This is extreme in every single category. One place has a different problem than the other, but we are dealing with crises on top of crises. At the same time, we've already got so much inflation. We already have so many issues. How will this ever be reversed? I mean, I just don't see it coming. Record surge in rent delinquency, up 7% in October, totaling 37% for US SMB. So small businesses are in the situation of not being able to pay. And a lot of that has to do with rising costs. I know a lot of people will point the finger and say, that's a business owner. He's the one who has to pay more tax and all these things. A lot of them are just going out of business. And you know how they had 4 employees? They're all fired as they close up shop. Or what happened in 2020 was, You had a guy who, let's say, owned a pizza place and maybe he employed 3 people. So what did he do? He had fired the people. He was one guy. He would stay there as many hours as he could. And then that's it. Hopefully he can survive. Many didn't. They shut their doors. So this is the time that we live in now today. And I really don't know the resolution to it while we still have the same policies in place. That's really my point. It's if we're not going to change the policies, if we're simply just going to throw more money at something, you're not going to resolve it. Okay? It doesn't work like that. If you're bleeding out, you don't put a Band-Aid on it. Okay? You have to actually fix the reason for you to bleed out. I can't believe I had to say that. Anyway, now we flip over to what's happening in Europe. Europe's energy crunch will trigger years of shortages and blackouts. To replace Russian gas, Europe is buying up fuel that used to go to developing countries. All of this, all at the same time, extreme levels, and yes, Europe is one of those places, but I think it's important to look at it and try to figure out how will the masses deal with the deindustrialization of what is clearly coming here. If you don't know about the deindustrialization, see the previous video to this one. Okay, you gotta make sure you subscribe to this channel while I bring you each and every piece of this puzzle literally on a daily basis. UK shop sales slow as consumers shift their spending towards essentials. Something that I have been warning about for a long time. I said to you, and I know you know it already, but it's that if people are not gonna buy that iPhone and the Rolls Royce, well, where's their money gonna go? Well, obviously to the more essentials, more and more and more towards that until they can't even afford that stuff. And so we see that happening today. People are just really getting squeezed. This is showing us that rising prices mask the underlying drop in sales volumes in October. Consumers delay buying winter clothes while mild weather lasts. It has been very clear and very apparent how this has unfolded and shouldn't, in my opinion, shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Now, while the economy is certainly in trouble, I wanted to give you a little bit of hope and, of course, summarize what we've seen today. People are scrambling to pay their bills, barely making ends meet, and even Mark Zuckerberg has lost $100 billion on his net worth. Are you shedding a tear for Zuckerberg? Without a major change, a fundamental shift for QE and stimulus, that's what I mean by that, nothing will change in a beneficial manner regardless of who wins an election. If we're still going to be buying mortgage-backed securities at the trillions of dollars, if we're still going to be sending money out to these multinational corporations who really don't need it, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. And I know that upsets people. I really do. I never picked a side back in, 2016, all those years. I never picked a side. And that had a detrimental effect on, what you see here with the money GPS. People pick a side. They make it very clear, and then people attach themselves to that. Look, I look at the data. I look at the economy. I look at that information. You got to decide who you want to vote for, if you want to vote at all. It is essential to always stick to your plans, which are locked on your personal goals. You got to get focused, laser beam focused on what your goals are. Is it wealth preservation? Is it accumulation? Whatever that is, you got to know what it is and you got to take action accordingly. Wait for a change in central bank policy before fully committing to any major investment right now. Always keep that in mind. If they're going to stick to the uncertain environment, well, what do you think is going to happen with the economy and financial markets? It's going to be up and down. It's going to be volatile. Educate yourself now on what you need to do. Be prepared in advance so that you're ready to move when the time comes. You have to have this in advance. For a lot of people, they simply wait till the last minute and then they say, oh, how do I do that? Or what should I do now? You got to know, you got to plan in advance. This is essential right now more than ever before. So you got to wake up to the music, okay? Really. Because a lot of people, you can see, they're pushed to the edge. perhaps on over that cliff. Okay? And I don't want to see that. I don't want to hear from that. It's unfortunate, to say the least. For everybody out there, if you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.